When my wife demanded a divorce after 15 years, I quietly agreed and signed the papers. As she celebrated with her lover at our favorite restaurant, I approached their table with a smile. "Congratulations on your freedom," I said, sliding an envelope across the table. Her smirk vanished as she read the DNA test results proving. You know what's funny about betrayal? It doesn't always come with dramatic music and thrown wine glasses. Sometimes it shows up on a Tuesday morning while you're drinking your third espresso and reviewing Series B metrics, wearing the same Tom Ford charcoal suit you bought to celebrate Verdict AI's first million in ARR. Sometimes it walks into your Upper West Side penthouse kitchen, the one with the marble countertops that cost more than most people's cars, and says 5 words that restructure your entire life. "I want a divorce, Grant." Sabrina stands there holding our daughter Zoe's Spider-Man lunchbox in one hand and legal papers in the other, like she's balancing a fucking acquisition deal. 15 years of marriage, 2 kids, and a shared portfolio worth north of 8 figures. And this is how she opens negotiations. No preamble. No, we need to talk. Just straight to the liquidation event. I don't throw anything. I don't storm out. I don't even raise my voice, because honestly, I've been in enough hostile boardroom encounters to recognize when someone's already made their decision and you're just there to execute the paperwork. Instead, I set down my coffee, the good stuff, blue bottle single origin that costs $18 a bag because we can afford ridiculous shit like that, and extend my hand. Let me see them. The divorce papers are a mess, legally speaking. Whoever drafted this thing clearly went to some third-tier law school and learned contract law from YouTube videos. The custody provisions are vague enough to drive a Tesla through. The asset division reads like it was written by someone who thinks equitable distribution means whatever sounds fair. And don't get me started on the spousal support calculations. It's the kind of sloppy legal work that would make my compliance team at Verdict AI break out in hives. But here's the thing about being CEO of a legal tech company that uses machine learning to audit contracts for AmLaw 200 firms. You learn to read between the lines. You develop an eye for what's missing, what's deliberately vague, what's designed to fuck you over with a smile. And as I flip through these pages, noting every poorly drafted clause and ambiguous term, I realized Sabrina didn't hire some bargain basement attorney because she was trying to save money. She hired someone disposable. Someone who'd write whatever she wanted without asking too many questions about why the asset disclosure looked like Swiss cheese. "This is what you want?" I asked, genuinely curious. No anger, no hurt feelings, just the same tone I use when a potential client shows me their existing contract management system and it's held together with digital duct tape and prayer. "It's fair, Grant. More than fair. Fair. Right. Fair like the time Goldman pitched us on their fair valuation that was 30% below market rate. Fair like when Amazon told book publishers their contract terms were industry standard, while simultaneously destroying their entire business model. In my experience, when someone leads with fair, you should start looking for where they're hiding the knife. I signed the papers anyway. Not because I agree with them. Christ, no. I signed them because I've learned something important from running a company. Sometimes the best strategic move is to let your opponent think they're winning while you're actually setting up the real game. Sabrina wants this to be quick and quiet? Fine. We'll play it her way for now. The pen moves across the signature lines with the same steady hand I use to sign term sheets and acquisition agreements. No drama, no hesitation. Just clean, legible signatures that'll hold up in court when this inevitably goes sideways. Because it will go sideways. They always do when someone's this eager to close without proper due diligence. "I'll get these to your attorney today," I tell her, sliding the papers back across our kitchen island. The same island where we used to plan family vacations and argue about Rowan's baseball schedule and whether we should put Zoe in private school. Now it's just another conference table where we're dissolving our joint venture. She nods, already mentally checked out, probably thinking about whatever comes next in her carefully orchestrated exit strategy. The kids don't need to know yet. Not until things are finalized. Agreed. Because nothing says amicable divorce like keeping your children in the dark while you blow up their entire world. But fine, I'll play along. For now, I grab my Tesla Model S keys, the P100D with ludicrous mode that I bought after our Series A closed, because sometimes you need a car that can go 0 to 60 faster than most venture capitalists can say market opportunity. The drive to her attorney's office in Midtown gives me exactly 17 minutes to think, which in startup terms is like having a whole fiscal quarter to strategize. The law firm occupies 3 floors of a glass tower that screams, "We bill $400 an hour for associates who learned everything they know from Law and Order." I dropped the envelope with the receptionist, some kid who probably graduated from Fordham last year and thinks working at a white shoe firm means she's automatically part of the legal elite. She handles the papers like they're nuclear launch codes instead of a routine matrimonial filing. "Mr. Thornfield will be in touch," she says, which is lawyer speak for, "We'll call you when we want more of your money." Back in the Tesla, I sit in the parking garage for exactly 90 seconds. Not because I'm emotional. I burned through those feelings somewhere between the spousal support calculations and the intentionally vague custody language. I pause because this is what good CEOs do when they're facing a major market disruption. They take a moment to assess the landscape before making their next move. The marriage is over. That part's clear. 15 years, 2 kids, and a shared vision of growing old together in our penthouse overlooking Central Park. All of it's getting liquidated like a failing portfolio company. But here's what Sabrina doesn't understand about playing games with someone who's spent the last decade in the venture capital ecosystem. I didn't build a $100 million company by accepting the first term sheet that landed on my desk. On my way home, I stop at the Oak Bar in the plaza. It's the kind of place where hedge fund managers go to celebrate successful hostile takeovers and private equity partners toast their latest roll-up. I order a single pour of Macallan 25, the $180 glass that tastes like liquid gold and poor financial decisions. The bartender, a guy who's probably seen more corporate drama than most SEC investigators, doesn't comment on the fact that I'm drinking alone at 3 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I sit there, watching the business people and tourists flow past the windows, and think about what comes next. Because this isn't really a divorce proceeding, it's a corporate restructuring. Sabrina wants to spin off from our joint venture and take her equity position with her. That's fine. That's business. But if she thinks she can execute a hostile takeover of our family assets without proper due diligence, she's about to learn why Verdict AI's contract analysis platform has helped our clients avoid billions in litigation costs. I finish the Macallan, leave a 20% tip, and walk back to my car. The city moves around me like a living algorithm. People making deals, breaking promises, restructuring their lives in real time. In about 6 hours, I'll be home to help Rowan with his algebra homework and read Zoe her bedtime story, the same routine we've had for years. They don't need to know their parents are dissolving our partnership. Not yet. But tomorrow, I'm going to start treating this situation like any other business challenge. Identify the key stakeholders, analyze the risk factors, and develop a comprehensive strategy for protecting my core assets. The kids, of course. Everything else is just negotiable terms on a contract that's already been breached. The first thing I do after tucking the kids into bed is what any self-respecting CEO does when facing a potential hostile takeover. I call my best counsel. Amara Okoye picks up on the second ring, probably because she recognizes my number and knows I don't make social calls at 9:30 on a Tuesday night. "Grant, what's the damage?" This is why I love working with Amara. No bullshit small talk. No "how are you holding up" platitudes. Just straight to the risk assessment. She spent 8 years running white-collar investigations at Cravath before going solo, which means she's seen every flavor of corporate fuckery imaginable. If there's a skeleton in someone's closet, she'll find it, catalog it, and figure out exactly how much leverage it's worth. Sabrina filed for divorce today. Papers were sloppy, timeline was aggressive, and she seemed way too confident for someone who should be worried about splitting a 9-figure asset base. I can hear Amara typing. She takes notes during every conversation like she's already preparing for deposition. It's a habit that annoyed the shit out of me when we first started working together, but now I find it oddly comforting. Someone's keeping score. Confident how? Like someone who's already done the math and knows exactly how this ends. The custody terms were practically insulting. Weekend visitation, limited decision-making authority, the whole thing. Either her attorney is completely incompetent, or they know something I don't. In my experience, incompetent attorneys don't inspire that kind of confidence in their clients. If she's this sure she's going to win, there's more to the story. You need to run an internal audit. Internal audit. I almost laugh. Because that's exactly the kind of corporate speak that makes perfect sense in this situation. When a portfolio company starts showing weird financials or their management team gets too cocky during board meetings, you don't just take their word for it. You dig. You verify. You treat their representations like the potential fraud they probably are. What am I looking for? Everything. Bank statements, credit reports, investment accounts, retirement funds, trusts, 529s, every asset that could be considered marital property. If there's financial infidelity happening here, it'll show up in the transaction history. And Grant, do this yourself. Don't delegate it to your CFO or your accountant. You need to see the raw data with your own eyes. She's right, of course. This is what I get for trusting someone else to manage our personal finances while I was busy scaling Verdict AI from a Series A startup to a potential unicorn. I've been so focused on our company's burn rate and runway projections that I let our household cash management run on autopilot. Classic founder mistake. Optimizing the business while ignoring the infrastructure that supports it. After we hang up, I pour myself 2 fingers of Blanton's, not the good stuff like the Macallan, just reliable bourbon for a long night of data analysis, and set up my laptop at our dining room table. The same table where Sabrina and I used to review our family budget and plan for the kids' college funds. Now it's about to become my war room. I start with our primary checking account at JP Morgan Private Bank, the one we use for mortgage payments and school tuition and all the other mundane expenses that keep our Upper West Side lifestyle running. 24 months of statements, exported to CSV, formatted for analysis. Then our savings accounts, investment portfolios, retirement funds, the kids' 529 college accounts, even the fucking joint account we use for grocery shopping and date night funds. By midnight, I've got 5 years of financial data spread across multiple spreadsheets, organized by account type and transaction category. It looks like a due diligence package for a mid-market acquisition, which I guess is exactly what this is, except instead of buying a company, I'm auditing my own marriage. The next morning, while Rowan eats Lucky Charms and Zoe practices spelling words at the kitchen counter, I feed our transaction data into Verdict AI's anomaly detection engine. It's the same machine learning model we use to help law firms identify compliance issues and contract risks, except now I'm pointing it at my own bank statements instead of some Fortune 500 companies' vendor agreements. Dad, why are you working at home? Rowan asks, which is a fair question since I usually leave for the office by 7:30. Just catching up on some financial planning, buddy. Nothing exciting. Nothing exciting. Right. Just using artificial intelligence to investigate whether my wife of 15 years has been systematically defrauding our marital assets. The kind of routine Wednesday morning activity that every tech CEO deals with, right alongside term sheet negotiations and product roadmap reviews. Can we get waffles? Zoe asks, because 8-year-olds have their priorities straight. Absolutely. Field trip to Clinton St. Baking after I finish this analysis, okay? I keep my voice light and normal, the same tone I use during all-hands meetings when I'm announcing layoffs or pivoting our entire business model. The kids don't need to know their parents are essentially dissolving a joint venture that's been operating for 15 years. They just need waffles and the illusion that their world is still stable. While the Verdict AI model processes our financial data, I create a new folder on my laptop, Personal Due Diligence, Project Restructure. Because if I'm going to treat this marriage like a failing portfolio company, I might as well use proper project management protocols. Subfolders for bank statements, investment records, real estate docs, insurance policies, tax returns. All the documentation you'd expect to review during a comprehensive business audit. The anomaly detection engine finishes its analysis around 10:30, right as I'm explaining to Zoe why we can't have ice cream for breakfast, even though technically we're rich enough to buy our own ice cream factory. The results populate on my screen like a fucking smoking gun. Multiple recurring transactions flagged as unusual patterns. Large cash transfers to accounts not in our joint portfolio. Regular monthly outflows that don't correspond to any household expenses I recognize. Investment activity in my name that I definitely didn't authorize. The kind of financial irregularities that would make any compliance officer start updating their resume. But the biggest red flag, the one that makes my stomach drop like we just lost our biggest client, is a series of transfers to something called Praxis Holdings LLC. Regular amounts, increasing over time, totaling nearly $200,000 over the past 2 years. I've never heard of Praxis Holdings. It's not in any of our investment documents or tax filings. When I search our email archives and text messages, the name doesn't appear anywhere. It's like this company materialized out of thin air, started receiving significant transfers from our joint accounts, and somehow became invisible to our financial planning process. This is either the most sophisticated money laundering operation I've ever seen, or my wife has been systematically moving our assets to an entity she controls without my knowledge or consent. In corporate terms, she's been executing a stealth acquisition of our marital portfolio, using my own capital as funding. I screenshot everything, save backup copies to 3 different cloud storage services, and start building what Amara would call a litigation hold package. Because whatever Praxis Holdings turns out to be, I'm pretty sure it's not going to be something that reflects well on Sabrina's character or her commitment to our marriage vows. The kids finish breakfast and start putting on their coats for our waffle expedition, chattering about whether Clinton Saint Baking has better blueberry waffles than the place we went last month. Normal kid conversations about normal kid priorities, completely oblivious to the fact that their father just discovered evidence of what might be systematic financial fraud. I close my laptop and smile at them like nothing's changed, because in their world, nothing has. Yet, but in my world? In the world where I've spent the last decade learning how to identify, analyze, and respond to existential business threats, the game just got a lot more interesting. You know what's beautiful about machine learning algorithms? They don't lie. They don't omit inconvenient details or spin narratives to make themselves look better. They just process data and spit out patterns, cold and mathematical, and absolutely fucking devastating when those patterns reveal that your wife has been systematically looting your joint assets for 2 years. I'm back at my dining room table at 6 a.m. Thursday morning, because that's what insomnia and potential financial fraud will do to your sleep schedule. The Verdict AI anomaly engine has been chewing through our transaction data all night, cross-referencing dates and amounts and payment recipients like it's auditing Goldman Sachs instead of my personal checking account. The results are laid out across 3 monitors like a hostile takeover analysis. Praxis Holdings LLC appears 47 times in our financial records over 24 months. The payment pattern is methodical, escalating, and timed with surgical precision to avoid triggering any automatic fraud alerts our bank might have in place. $5,000 in March 2023, then $5,000 again in April. By June, it's $7,500. September jumps to $10,000. By this year, she's moving $12,000 monthly to this mystery entity, with some months showing multiple transfers. The total damage? $218,750, not counting whatever fees and interest our money might be generating in accounts I can't see. But here's the really interesting part, the part that makes my compliance-trained brain start connecting dots. The timing of these transfers corresponds almost perfectly with our IVF treatments for Zoe. The first Praxis payment hits our account 6 weeks after our initial fertility consultation. The amounts increase right around the time we started the hormone protocols. The final large transfer happens 2 months after Zoe was born. Coincidence? In a world where I've spent the last decade teaching artificial intelligence to identify fraud patterns in multi-billion-dollar corporate transactions, I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in data, and the data is telling a story that's making me physically nauseous. I call our private banker at JP Morgan, a guy named Mitchell Pearson who manages portfolios for tech executives and treats 8-figure account balances like rounding errors. The kind of banker who remembers your kids' birthdays and never questions why you're buying Tesla stock at $900 a share. Grant, good to hear from you. How's the Series C preparation going? Mitchell, I need some information about transfers from our joint checking to an entity called Praxis Holdings. Can you run compliance checks on the recipient account? Professional silence. The kind of pause that happens when wealth management professionals realize they're about to get dragged into someone's divorce proceedings. I'll need both account holders' authorization for detailed transaction analysis. The transfers were initiated from accounts I have full access to. I'm just asking for basic compliance verification, whether the recipient entity exists, whether the account is properly registered, that kind of thing. Give me an hour. While I wait, I dive into business records databases, the same tools we use for vendor due diligence at Verdict AI. Secretary of State filings, corporate registrations, tax ID lookups. All the public information that should exist if Praxis Holdings is a legitimate business entity. The results are exactly what I expected and absolutely not what I wanted to find. Praxis Holdings LLC was incorporated in Delaware 18 months ago, right in the middle of our fertility treatments. Registered agent is some corporate services company that specializes in creating shell entities for people who want to move money without drawing attention. No website, no business address, no employees listed anywhere. The kind of bare-bones corporate structure that exists solely to hold assets and obscure ownership. But here's where it gets interesting. The incorporation documents list Sabrina Mercer as the managing member and sole owner. My wife created a shell company and has been systematically transferring our marital assets into it for nearly 2 years, all while we were supposedly building our family and planning our future together. In corporate terms, she's been executing a stealth-leveraged buyout of our marriage using my own capital as financing. Mitchell calls back with news that confirms what I already suspected. The Praxis account exists and appears to be properly maintained. All transfers were initiated with valid authorization from your joint account. Is there a specific concern I should be aware of? Not yet, I tell him, because I'm not ready to turn this into a formal banking investigation until I understand the full scope of what I'm dealing with. Can you put a monitoring alert on that account relationship going forward? Absolutely. Anything else I can help with? Actually, yes. I want to restructure some of our asset allocation. Can we set up time next week to discuss moving some holdings into individual accounts? Because if Sabrina wants to play shell company games with our money, I need to make sure the remaining assets are protected before she gets more creative with her financial engineering. In M&A terms, I'm implementing poison pill defenses to prevent further hostile acquisition of our portfolio. The morning gets worse when I start cross-referencing the Praxis payments with Sabrina's calendar and credit card statements. Those late nights at the hospital that became so frequent during our IVF process. Half of them don't correspond to any emergency room shifts on her official schedule. The medical conferences that required overnight stays? I can't find registration records for most of them. Either my wife developed a gambling addiction and the most elaborate cover story in medical history, or she's been using our fertility treatments as cover for whatever the hell Praxis Holdings actually does. I'm deep into credit card analysis when Rowan wanders into the dining room, still wearing his Minecraft pajamas and looking confused about why Dad's surrounded by financial documents at 7 in the morning. Are we poor now? He asks, which is such a perfectly innocent kid question that I almost laugh despite everything. No, buddy, just doing some accounting work. Want some cereal? Can I have the sugar cereal? Today's a sugar cereal day, I tell him, because when your wife is potentially running a shell company scam out of your joint checking account, normal parenting rules don't really apply. While Rowan crunches through a bowl of Frosted Flakes, I create a secure folder on our home server and start building what any good litigator would recognize as a documentary evidence package. Screenshots of every Praxis transaction, business registration records, banking authorizations, calendar correlations, all of it organized with the same obsessive attention to detail I use for Series C pitch decks. Because whatever Praxis Holdings turns out to be, and whatever Sabrina thought she was accomplishing by creating it, she made one critical mistake. She used our joint assets to fund her little side project, which means I have standing to investigate every transaction, every recipient, and every business relationship connected to that money. In venture capital, we have a saying: follow the money and you'll find the truth. In marriage, apparently, the same principle applies. The only difference is that when a portfolio company tries to defraud their investors, you just write off the loss and move on to the next deal. When your wife does it, the stakes are considerably higher. Amara's text comes at 11:47 p.m. on Friday. Found someone who might have answers about Praxis. Can you meet tomorrow? Discreet location. Bring cash for parking. This is why I keep Amara on retainer even when Verdict AI isn't facing active litigation. She doesn't just practice law. She investigates like a forensic accountant with a law degree and the patience of someone who spent years unraveling corporate fraud schemes. When she says she's found someone, it means she's already verified their credibility and figured out exactly how much their information is worth. Saturday morning finds me driving the Tesla down the FDR Drive towards some diner she picked near the South Street Seaport. It's the kind of place that serves all-day breakfast to dock workers and tourists who don't know any better, which makes it perfect for conversations you don't want appearing in anyone's calendar or expense reports. I park 3 blocks away and walk, because paranoia is just risk management when your wife might be running a medical fraud operation out of your joint checking account. The diner smells like hash browns and industrial coffee, the kind of authentic New York ambience that costs $300 a plate in Midtown restaurants, but here just costs whatever's on the menu. Amara's already seated in a back booth, wearing jeans and a Columbia Law sweatshirt instead of her usual litigation armor. Across from her sits a woman I don't recognize, mid-40s, nervous energy, the kind of person who keeps checking the exits like she's expecting trouble. Grant, meet Dr. Elena Morozov, Amara says as I slide into the booth. She used to work at Riverside Children's Hospital. Embryology department. Elena extends a hand but doesn't make eye contact, which in my experience means one of two things. Either she's about to lie to me, or she's about to tell me something that's going to fuck up my entire worldview. Given that we're meeting in a diner that probably hasn't been renovated since the Clinton administration, I'm betting on option 2. Dr. Morozov reached out through some back channels after hearing about your situation. Amara continues, which is lawyer speak for, she called me because she has information that could blow this case wide open, but she's terrified of the legal consequences. What kind of information? I ask, keeping my voice neutral. In venture capital, you learn that the biggest revelations often come from the people who seem most reluctant to talk. Elena glances around the diner, then leans forward. I resigned from Riverside 8 months ago after raising concerns about irregularities in the fertility program. Concerns that were not well received by hospital administration. What kind of irregularities? She reaches into her purse and pulls out a manila folder, the kind of low-tech document storage that screams, I don't trust digital communications. Inside are photocopied emails, lab reports, and what looks like financial records, the paper trail that any good whistleblower accumulates before they decide to torch their career. There was a secondary operation running parallel to the legitimate IVF program. Patients who could afford to pay premium fees, cash fees, routed through external entities, received enhanced services. Enhanced services. In the medical world, that phrase usually means illegal but profitable, the same way creative accounting means fraud that hasn't been caught yet. Enhanced how? Elena slides a lab report across the table. Genetic screening that went beyond standard medical protocols. Designer selections. And in some cases, she pauses, takes a breath like someone about to jump off a cliff. Sample substitutions. The coffee in my mouth suddenly tastes like aluminum. Substitutions? Anonymous donor material substituted for intended biological parents. Without consent. Without disclosure. Patients paid premium fees thinking they were getting advanced genetic screening for their own biological children, but what they actually got was donor genetic material selected according to specific criteria. I stare at the lab reports, trying to process what she's telling me. The dates line up perfectly with our IVF treatments. The patient identification numbers are coded, but there are enough details to make me physically nauseous. How was this funded? Amara asks, because she's already 3 steps ahead of my shock and thinking like the litigator she is. Through shell companies that collected the premium fees and paid kickbacks to participating medical staff. The main entity I was aware of was called Praxis Holdings. The room starts spinning like I just took a margin call on a position I thought was hedged. Praxis Holdings, Sabrina's mystery shell company, wasn't just moving our money around. It was funding a fucking genetic fraud operation at the hospital where my wife works and where our children were conceived. Dr. Morozov, I managed to say, were you involved in treatments for Sabrina Mercer? She nods, looking miserable. Your wife coordinated several of the enhanced procedures. She had access to donor genetic material and lab protocols. The premium fees were split between participating staff and Praxis Holdings. The children born through this program were not biologically related to their intended fathers in multiple cases. The donor genetic material was selected for specific traits, intelligence indicators, physical characteristics, absence of genetic disorders. Families paid between $50,000 and $200,000 in additional fees, thinking they were paying for advanced screening of their own genetic material. The folder contains email threads between Sabrina and other hospital staff, discussing inventory management and client preferences and donor compatibility. Reading them is like discovering that your trusted CFO has been running a Ponzi scheme out of the company pension fund. Why are you telling me this? I ask Elena. Because when I tried to report it through proper channels, I was told my concerns were unfounded and my employment was terminated for performance issues. But I kept copies of everything, and when I heard through mutual contacts that you were asking questions about Praxis Holdings, she trails off, but I get it. She's the classic whistleblower, someone with damaging information and no safe way to use it until the right opportunity presents itself. In this case, that opportunity is my divorce proceedings and the potential to expose a systematic fraud operation. Amara takes notes on everything, photographing documents and asking follow-up questions like she's already building a federal case. Which, knowing Amara, she probably is. How many families were affected? She asks. At least 12 that I'm aware of. Possibly more. The full scope was compartmentalized. Different staff members only knew their piece of the operation. I think about Rowan and Zoe, sleeping peacefully in their beds while their entire genetic identity is potentially a lie purchased with our own money. The kids I've been raising for 8 and 11 years, who call me dad and look to me for everything from homework help to life advice, might not be biologically mine at all. But here's the thing that really gets me. The detail that makes this whole situation feel like a particularly vicious corporate raid. Sabrina didn't just participate in this fraud operation. She used our joint assets to fund it, which means I was unknowingly financing a scheme to deceive myself about the paternity of my own children. In venture capital terms, she executed a leveraged buyout of our family using my own capital, then restructured the assets according to her specifications without my knowledge or consent. What do you need from me? I ask Elena. Legal protection, financial support if this goes to trial, and someone with enough resources and credibility to make sure this gets properly investigated instead of buried by hospital administrators. I look at Amara, who nods like she's already calculating billable hours and discovery timelines. You'll have both, I tell Elena. But first, I need to know exactly which procedures my wife coordinated and which donor genetic material was used. Because before I can figure out how to protect my children from this clusterfuck, I need to know whether they're actually my children at all. The drive home from the diner takes 43 minutes, which is exactly how long it takes for the full scope of this clusterfuck to sink in. By the time I'm parking the Tesla in our building's garage, I've moved through the 5 stages of grief and landed somewhere between cold rage and strategic planning. Because here's what I know for certain. If Elena's telling the truth, and Amara's preliminary document review suggests she is, then my wife didn't just commit financial fraud. She potentially stole my biological legacy and sold it back to me for $200,000. In corporate terms, she executed a bait-and-switch acquisition where I thought I was investing in one asset portfolio, but actually received completely different holdings. The kind of securities fraud that would land a CFO in federal prison and destroy any company's market credibility forever. But this isn't a company. These are my children. I spend Saturday afternoon at CVS buying 3 different DNA testing kits with cash, because the last thing I need is credit card records showing up in discovery proceedings. The teenage cashier looks bored as she rings up 3 separate $199 genetic analysis packages, probably assuming I'm some paranoid rich guy who wants to trace his ancestry back to European royalty or some shit. If only it were that simple. The kits sit on my home office desk like evidence in a criminal trial, which I guess they are. Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, and some third-party lab that Amara recommended because they specialize in paternity verification for legal proceedings. Belt and suspenders approach. If I'm going to blow up my children's understanding of their genetic identity, I want to make damn sure the science is bulletproof. Rowan and Zoe are watching some Disney Plus series in the living room when I walk out with the testing materials, and I realize I need to turn this into a game instead of the potentially traumatic revelation it actually is. Because whatever these results show, the kids don't deserve to carry the psychological damage of their mother's fraud operation. Hey guys, want to do a fun science experiment? Zoe looks up from the TV, immediately interested because 8-year-olds are hardwired to love anything that involves spitting into containers or playing with laboratory equipment. Rowan's more skeptical. At 11, He's developing the kind of analytical thinking that recognizes when adults are being suspiciously enthusiastic about random activities. What kind of experiment, he asks. DNA analysis. We're going to learn about genetics and family traits and all the cool science stuff that makes people related to each other. This is technically true, just not the whole truth. We are going to learn about genetics and family relationships. We're just not going to like what we learn. I make it fun and educational, explaining how DNA works while we swab the inside of their cheeks, talking about chromosomes and inheritance patterns, and why Zoe has brown eyes like Sabrina while Rowan's are blue like mine. Or at least, like I thought they were like mine. The kids think it's hilarious that we're mailing our spit to strangers in exchange for information about where our great-great-grandparents came from. Will it tell us if we're related to famous people? Zoe asks. Maybe. I tell her, sealing her sample tube with the kind of careful documentation I usually reserve for SEC filings. We'll find out in a few weeks. After they go to bed, I add my own DNA sample to the collection and prepare the packages for shipment. 3 different labs, full legal chain of custody documentation, certified mail with tracking numbers. The same level of evidentiary care I'd use if I were preparing for a federal fraud investigation. Which, come to think of it, I probably am. The next 5 days drag by like the worst Series B fundraising process in venture capital history. Every morning, I check tracking numbers and delivery confirmations like I'm monitoring our burn rate during a cash flow crisis. Every evening, I help the kids with homework and read bedtime stories while wondering whether the genetic science happening in some laboratory 3 states away is about to prove that everything I thought I knew about my family was a carefully constructed lie. Rowan's playing Little League this season, and I spend Tuesday evening at his practice throwing batting practice and trying to focus on normal dad activities while my phone buzzes with status updates from 3 different DNA analysis companies. The other parents chat about school districts and summer vacation plans and which kids are ready for travel baseball, the kind of mundane suburban conversations that used to bore me but now feel like artifacts from a simpler time when my biggest worry was whether Verdict AI's machine learning models were accurately flagging contract risks. Grant, you seem distracted, says Mike Rosenberg, whose son plays second base and whose small talk usually revolves around his hedge fund's latest acquisitions. Everything okay with the company? Just family stuff. I tell him, which is the most honest thing I've said to anyone in a week. Thursday brings the first results. 23andMe delivers via email with the kind of cheerful branding that suggests genetic analysis is supposed to be fun rather than potentially devastating. I open the report in my home office with a glass of Blanton's, because if I'm about to discover that my children aren't biologically mine, I want to be appropriately medicated for the revelation. The summary page loads with ancestry percentages and health predispositions and a family tree that shows genetic relationships with other 23andMe users. I scroll down to the section I actually care about, DNA relatives. Probability of paternity for Rowan Mercer, 0%. Probability of paternity for Zoe Mercer, 0%. The laptop screen blurs for a second, and I realize I've been holding my breath. Not because I'm surprised. Elena's documentation was too detailed and Sabrina's financial records too damning for any other outcome. But because seeing it confirmed in official laboratory results makes it real in a way that witness testimony and circumstantial evidence never could. My children, the kids I've raised and loved and planned college funds for, are not biologically related to me. They're the genetic offspring of anonymous donors selected by my wife and paid for with money stolen from our joint assets. In corporate terms, I've been paying operational expenses for assets I don't actually own, based on fraudulent representations from a trusted business partner. The other lab results arrive Friday and Saturday, confirming what 23andMe already established. Clean scientific consensus, 0% probability of biological paternity for both children. I print copies of all 3 reports, scan them into secure cloud storage, and place certified copies in our safe deposit box at JP Morgan. Because whatever happens next, divorce proceedings, criminal investigations, civil litigation against the hospital, I need bulletproof documentation that my wife orchestrated a systematic fraud operation that included identity theft, financial theft, and genetic theft of my intended biological legacy. Saturday evening, I pour myself 3 fingers of Macallan 25 and sit on our penthouse balcony overlooking Central Park. The city spreads out below me like a living algorithm. Millions of people making decisions and building families and trusting that their most fundamental relationships are what they appear to be. I think about Rowan's batting stance and Zoe's laugh and the thousand small moments that make someone a father regardless of genetic compatibility. Then I think about the legal strategy Amara's probably developing and the criminal exposure Sabrina's facing and whether the kids will ever forgive me for destroying their understanding of their own identity. But mostly I think about control. For the first time since this whole nightmare started, I have complete information about the scope of the fraud and the full extent of the damage. I know what was stolen, how it was stolen, and who was responsible for stealing it. In venture capital, we call this achieving information asymmetry. When you know something your counterpart doesn't know, and that information gives you negotiating leverage. Sabrina still thinks I'm going to quietly accept her divorce terms and disappear into supervised weekend visitation. She has no idea that I've identified her shell company, connected her to a medical fraud operation, and confirmed that our children aren't biologically mine, which means it's time to start preparing the envelope I'm going to hand her at dinner. You know what I love about institutional corruption? It always thinks it's smarter than it actually is. The people running these schemes. Whether it's Enron executives cooking their books or hospital administrators covering up medical fraud, they always assume that everyone else is either too stupid or too scared to connect the dots. They forget that some of us built our careers on pattern recognition and risk analysis. Monday morning, I draft what might be the most important compliance report of my professional life. Not for Verdict AI, not for some Fortune 500 client facing regulatory scrutiny, but for Riverside Children's Hospital's board of directors. It reads like every other ethics complaint I've ever written. Clean prose, numbered exhibits, zero editorial commentary. Just facts, chronology, and supporting documentation that speaks for itself. Systematic irregularities in Fertility Services Department. Urgent board review required. The opening paragraph establishes standing and credibility without wasting words on emotional appeals. I am Grant Mercer, CEO of Verdict AI and former patient of Riverside's IVF program. Based on financial records analysis and witness testimony, I am reporting potential fraud in your fertility services department that may affect multiple patient families and expose the hospital to significant criminal and civil liability. Then I lay out the evidence like I'm pitching a Series C to investors who've seen every flavor of startup bullshit imaginable. Bank records showing systematic transfers to Praxis Holdings. Elena's documentary evidence of genetic substitution protocols. Lab reports confirming non-consensual donor material usage. DNA testing results proving that premium-paying patients received fraudulent biological services. The exhibits section looks like a federal securities investigation. 23 pages of supporting documentation, each piece referenced and cross-indexed. Email threads between Sabrina and other staff discussing inventory management and client specifications. Financial records showing how premium fees were collected and distributed. Patient files with coded notations that Elena helped me decode. I keep the tone professional and dispassionate, the same voice I use when explaining contract compliance failures to nervous general counsels. No accusations, no demands for specific actions, just a clear presentation of facts that require immediate institutional response. Based on this evidence, I recommend the board immediately engage external counsel for comprehensive investigation, implement litigation holds on all relevant communications and records, and consider whether disclosure obligations to affected families and regulatory authorities may apply under applicable medical practice and consumer protection statutes. It's the kind of language that makes hospital administrators wake up in cold sweats and start updating their malpractice insurance policies. I email the complaint to Dr. Howard Lynn, Riverside's board chair, at 9:47 a.m. Not through the hospital's general patient services portal or some bureaucratic complaint process that would get buried in administrative review. Directly to the guy whose job it is to prevent exactly this kind of institutional liability exposure. Dr. Lynn calls me back at 11:23 a.m., which in institutional response time is basically the speed of light. When board chairs of major medical facilities call you personally within 2 hours, it means your complaint just moved to the front of their risk management priority list. Mr. Mercer, I received your documentation. This is concerning. Concerning, right? The same way Chernobyl was concerning, or the 2008 financial crisis was concerning. When lawyers use words like concerning to describe systematic fraud operations, it usually means they're already calculating settlement costs and updating their litigation budget. Dr. Lin, I want to be clear about my intentions here. I'm not looking for financial compensation or media attention. I just want to ensure that whatever happened to my family doesn't happen to other families, and that appropriate accountability measures are implemented. We take all ethics complaints seriously. The board will convene an emergency session to review your materials and determine next steps. I appreciate that. And Dr. Lin, you should know that I've retained counsel and that copies of this documentation have been provided to law enforcement agencies with jurisdiction over medical fraud matters. This isn't just an internal hospital issue anymore. Professional silence. The kind of pause that happens when corporate executives realize they're not dealing with an angry patient who can be managed with customer service protocols, but with someone who understands exactly how institutional liability works and has the resources to pursue it systematically. Thank you for bringing this to our attention, Mr. Mercer. We'll be in touch. Tuesday afternoon, Amara gets a call from Riverside's general counsel requesting an informal discussion about my complaint. In legal terms, this is like a defense attorney asking for plea bargain negotiations before the indictment gets unsealed. It means they've reviewed the evidence, confirmed its authenticity, and realized they're facing potential exposure that could destroy the hospital's reputation and financial viability. Wednesday brings news that Sabrina has been placed on administrative leave pending the board's investigation. Not suspended, not terminated, just administrative leave, with the kind of careful phrasing that suggests the hospital's lawyers are already thinking about employment law implications and severance negotiations. By Thursday, word is spreading through the medical community like a virus through a conference network. Elena texts me that 3 other former fertility department employees have reached out to her with concerns about procedures they witnessed but never reported. In whistleblower terminology, this is called the floodgate effect. Once one person comes forward with institutional fraud allegations, others find the courage to add their voices to the chorus. Friday brings the call I've been expecting. Dr. Lin informing me that the hospital board has voted to retain Morrison & Forster, a white shoe law firm that specializes in healthcare compliance and institutional crisis management, to conduct an independent investigation of fertility department practices. We've also engaged Deloitte to perform a comprehensive financial audit of all departmental accounts and vendor relationships. He adds, which is corporate speak for, we're trying to figure out how much money was stolen and how many families were defrauded before this becomes a federal criminal case. What's the timeline for your investigation? 60 to 90 days for preliminary findings. We'll be contacting affected families as we identify them. Affected families. I almost laugh, because affected is such a sanitized way to describe people who paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for genetic fraud services. Like calling Bernie Madoff's investors affected parties instead of victims of systematic theft. But here's what Dr. Lin and his board don't understand yet. I'm not just another affected family waiting for their investigation to determine the scope of the damage. I'm the guy who identified the fraud pattern, documented the evidence chain, and exposed the systematic nature of the operation. In venture capital terms, I'm not just an investor who got burned by a fraudulent portfolio company. I'm the lead investor who's going to coordinate the other victims, drive the litigation strategy, and make sure everyone involved faces appropriate consequences for their role in this clusterfuck. Saturday evening, I'm home helping Rowan with a social studies project about government accountability when my phone buzzes with a text from Elena. 3 more families confirmed affected. Meeting with federal prosecutors Monday. This is bigger than we thought. Bigger than we thought. I look at my kids working on their homework, completely oblivious to the fact that their genetic identities are evidence in what's becoming a federal fraud investigation, and realize that bigger might be an understatement. Because when hospital board chairs start hiring Morrison & Forster and federal prosecutors start taking meetings, it means this isn't just about my marriage anymore. It's about systematic institutional fraud that potentially affected dozens of families and millions of dollars in healthcare payments. And I'm the guy who's going to make sure every responsible party faces appropriate accountability. Family court turns out to be nothing like the dramatic legal proceedings you see on Netflix. No passionate closing arguments, no surprise witnesses, no moment where the judge pounds their gavel and delivers justice with righteous fury. Just a tired-looking jurist in Manhattan family court reviewing exhibits like she's auditing quarterly earnings reports, occasionally asking clarifying questions in the same tone most people use to order coffee. Judge Patricia Holloway has been doing this for 17 years, which means she's seen every flavor of marital dissolution imaginable. High net worth divorces where spouses hide assets in Cayman Islands trusts, custody battles involving private equity executives who think parenting time should be scheduled like board meetings, prenup disputes that require forensic accountants to untangle complex equity arrangements. She reviews my documentation package the way a seasoned investor reviews a pitch deck, methodically, skeptically, looking for the holes that less experienced lawyers might miss. Amara presents our case with the precision of someone arguing before the Second Circuit. Clean chronology, numbered exhibits, zero emotional appeals. The DNA testing results that prove non-paternity. Elena's testimony about the systematic fraud operation. Bank records showing the Praxis Holdings transfers. Medical records confirming that premium fees were paid for services not received. Your Honor, Mr. Mercer has been the victim of systematic fraud that includes identity theft, financial theft, and conspiracy to commit medical malpractice. The children have lived with him as their primary father figure for their entire lives, and their emotional stability requires continuity of that relationship while the criminal investigation proceeds. Sabrina's attorney, some guy named Jeffrey Thornfield who probably learned family law from a correspondence course, tries to argue that the fraud allegations are unsubstantiated and inflammatory. He keeps calling the evidence preliminary and suggesting that the DNA results might be inconclusive, like paternity testing is some kind of subjective opinion poll instead of hard science. It's the kind of weak advocacy you get when your client can't afford proper representation because her assets are frozen pending criminal investigation. Thornfield's clearly out of his depth, making procedural errors that would get a first-year associate fired from any respectable firm. He objects to evidence that's clearly admissible, misquotes custody statutes, and generally performs like someone who learned litigation strategy from watching Law and Order reruns. Judge Holloway listens to his arguments with the patience of someone who's heard every possible variation of "my client is innocent" despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. When he finishes his presentation, she asks exactly one question. Mr. Thornfield, are you disputing the authenticity of the DNA testing results? Well, Your Honor, genetic testing can sometimes be. Are you disputing their authenticity? Yes or no? No, Your Honor, but. Then we're moving to interim custody arrangements. Mr. Mercer, given the ongoing criminal investigation and the need to ensure child stability, I'm granting you temporary full custody pending resolution of the underlying fraud allegations. Ms. Mercer's visitation will be supervised and limited to weekends, subject to review as the investigation proceeds. Just like that. No dramatic speeches, no extended deliberation, just a judicial determination based on evidence and statutory factors. Thornfield tries to object, but Judge Holloway's already moving to the next item on her calendar. In the hallway afterward, Sabrina's lawyer attempts some kind of negotiation about asset division, probably hoping to salvage something from this clusterfuck before the criminal charges get filed. Amara listens politely, then delivers the kind of response that ends conversations permanently. Jeffrey, your client used fraudulent representations to obtain marital assets, then transferred those assets to shell companies she controlled, all while deceiving her husband about the paternity of their children. Her leverage position in this negotiation is essentially non-existent. We'll be seeking full restitution of the diverted funds, plus damages, plus attorney fees, plus whatever punitive awards the court deems appropriate. She pauses, letting that sink in, then adds the legal equivalent of a kill shot. Oh, and Jeffrey? The prenup has a morality clause that voids spousal support in cases of fraud or infidelity. You might want to review Section 12.3 before you start talking about settlement terms. Thornfield's face goes through several interesting color changes as he realizes his client's financial situation is considerably worse than he thought. Morality clauses in prenuptial agreements are like poison pills in corporate acquisitions. They're designed to make hostile actions prohibitively expensive for the aggressor. Back at the office, I spend the afternoon restructuring our personal financial architecture like I'm preparing for a Series C funding round. The kids need stability, which means maintaining their current lifestyle and educational arrangements while protecting the assets that fund those arrangements from whatever civil litigation might be coming. I move liquid holdings into a new revocable trust with proper documentation and legal authorization. Update beneficiary designations on retirement accounts and life insurance policies. Freeze joint credit lines with appropriate notice to prevent additional unauthorized access. Restructure the 529 college funds to ensure the kids' educational resources remain protected regardless of how the criminal proceedings affect Sabrina's financial situation. It's the same risk management process I'd use if Verdict AI were facing potential acquisition by a hostile competitor. Except instead of protecting shareholder value, I'm protecting my children's financial security from their mother's criminal liability. The Upper West Side penthouse gets more complicated, since it's jointly owned and represents about 40% of our total real estate portfolio. Amara recommends against any precipitous action that might look like asset concealment. So for now it stays in joint ownership while we build the case for fraudulent transfer claims. That evening, I'm helping Zoe with her math homework when she asks the question I've been dreading. Daddy, why doesn't Mommy live here anymore? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her mother is facing federal fraud charges for stealing her genetic identity and selling it back to her father using their joint bank account? How do you translate systematic medical malpractice conspiracy into language appropriate for someone who still believes in the tooth fairy? Mommy and Daddy are having some grown-up disagreements about important things. I tell her, which is technically accurate while being completely inadequate. But you and Rowan are the most important things in both our lives, and that's never going to change. Are we still going to live here? Absolutely. This is your home, and I'm going to make sure it stays your home. Later, after both kids are asleep, I pour myself a glass of Macallan 25 and review the day's legal developments. Temporary custody secured. Asset protection measures implemented. Criminal investigation proceeding on schedule. Civil litigation strategy taking shape. In venture capital terms, I've successfully defended against a hostile acquisition attempt and maintained control of the most valuable assets in my portfolio. The kids are safe, financially secure, and living in the same environment they've known their entire lives. But there's still one more move to make before this restructuring is complete. One final negotiation that'll determine whether Sabrina really understands the magnitude of what she's lost and what she's facing. I pick up my phone and make a reservation at La Bella Vita for tomorrow night. Table for 3, 8 o'clock, the same restaurant where we celebrated our engagement 15 years ago. Because some conversations require the right venue, and some revelations deserve proper staging. Time to show Sabrina exactly what information asymmetry looks like when you're on the wrong side of it. La Bella Vita hasn't changed much since I proposed to Sabrina here 15 years ago. Same exposed brick walls, same Edison bulb lighting that costs more per square foot than most people's rent, same clientele of hedge fund managers and Upper East Side socialites who treat $40 pasta like a reasonable Tuesday night expense. The kind of place where power brokers close acquisition deals over wine that costs more than a Tesla payment, and where marriages get dissolved with the same casual efficiency. I arrive at exactly 8 o'clock wearing the Tom Ford charcoal suit I bought to celebrate Verdict AI's Series B closing, the same suit I was wearing when Sabrina handed me those divorce papers 3 weeks ago. Funny how certain pieces of armor become significant during wartime. The maitre d' recognizes me, probably because we've spent enough money here over the years to fund a small startup seed round. Mr. Mercer, your table is ready. Will Mrs. Mercer be joining you this evening? She'll be along shortly. With a guest. I'm seated at our usual table, corner booth with a view of the dining room. Perfect for observing without being overheard. The same spot where we used to plan family vacations and discuss Rowan's school applications and argue about whether to invest more in Verdict AI's equity round or diversify into real estate. Now it's just another conference room where I'm about to execute the final phase of a very different kind of negotiation. Sabrina walks in at 8:15 with Dr. Lucas Hale trailing behind her like some kind of medical entourage. Lucas is exactly what you'd expect from a pediatric surgery star who moonlights as a healthcare entrepreneur. Perfectly styled hair, Hermes tie, the kind of confident swagger that comes from spending your days saving children's lives and your evenings pitching private equity firms on rolling up specialty clinics through venture capital funding. She's wearing the red Valentino dress she bought for our anniversary last year, the one that cost more than most people's monthly salary and makes her look like she's attending a gala instead of potentially the last dinner we'll ever share as a family unit. It's a power move, obviously. Dress for the life you want, not the federal fraud investigation you're facing. They're laughing about something as they approach the table, probably some inside joke about medical procedures or investment opportunities or whatever the fuck people talk about when they're building their new life on the wreckage of someone else's marriage. The kind of casual intimacy that develops when you're planning a future together while systematically destroying the financial foundation of your current relationship. Grant, Sabrina says, sliding into the booth with practiced elegance. You remember Lucas. Of course. How's the clinic acquisition strategy working out, Lucas? Last I heard, you were raising a Series A to consolidate pediatric surgical services across the tri-state area. Lucas extends his hand with the kind of firm grip that screams, I close deals and save lives in equal measure. He's probably wondering why his new girlfriend's soon-to-be ex-husband is making small talk about venture capital instead of throwing wine glasses or causing the kind of scene that gets people banned from Manhattan's better restaurants. Going well, actually. We're seeing tremendous consolidation opportunities in specialty pediatric care, especially with the right technological integration and operational efficiency improvements. Right. Because nothing says healthcare innovation like rolling up independent medical practices through private equity funding and optimizing them for maximum profit extraction. It's the same playbook that's destroyed everything from journalism to retail, except now they're applying it to children's medical care. That's fascinating, I tell him, signaling the sommelier for a bottle of something expensive enough to match the occasion. I've always admired entrepreneurs who can identify market inefficiencies and develop scalable solutions. We order appetizers and make polite conversation about the restaurant's wine list and the latest Broadway shows, the kind of sophisticated Manhattan small talk that masks the fact that everyone at the table knows this dinner is actually a business meeting disguised as social pleasantries. Sabrina keeps checking her phone, probably monitoring news coverage of the Riverside investigation or coordinating with her legal team about the federal prosecutors who are building criminal cases against multiple fertility department staff members. Lucas talks about his advisory board positions and the telehealth startup that's disrupting traditional pediatric care delivery models through AI-powered diagnostic tools. I listen and nod and ask follow-up questions like someone genuinely interested in their professional achievements, while internally calculating exactly how much leverage I'm about to deploy and whether the timing is optimal for maximum psychological impact. The entrees arrive, $48 branzino for Sabrina, $55 Wagyu for Lucas, $36 pasta for me, because I'm not particularly hungry, and this isn't really about the food anyway. We're halfway through the main course when I decide the moment has reached optimal dramatic potential. Congratulations, by the way, I say, reaching into my jacket pocket for the envelope I've been carrying around for the past week. On your freedom, I mean, and your new relationship. I slide the envelope across the table with the same casual precision I use when presenting term sheets to potential investors. Clean white paper, professional presentation, the kind of documentation that changes conversations permanently. What's this? Sabrina asks, though her voice carries just enough uncertainty to suggest she already suspects this evening isn't going according to her script. Just some information I thought you should have. Both of you. She opens the envelope while Lucas leans over to read along, probably expecting divorce settlement terms or custody modification proposals or maybe some kind of financial disclosure related to our asset division proceedings. Instead, they're looking at 3 separate DNA analysis reports, each showing 0% probability of paternity for both Rowan and Zoe, along with lab headers that make it clear these aren't preliminary results or inconclusive findings. They're definitive scientific conclusions from 3 different genetic testing companies, all reaching identical conclusions about the biological relationship between me and the children I've been raising for 8 and 11 years. The transformation is immediate and devastating. Sabrina's carefully maintained composure crumbles like a house of cards in a hurricane. The confident smile disappears, replaced by the kind of panicked expression you see when people realize their entire strategy has been based on information that's no longer secret. Lucas reads the first page, then the second, then looks at Sabrina like he's seeing her for the first time. Which, in a way, he probably is. Because up until 30 seconds ago, he thought he was dating a successful pediatrician going through an amicable divorce, not someone facing federal fraud charges for systematically deceiving patients about genetic services while stealing marital assets to fund the operation. How long have you known? Sabrina asks, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 weeks. Since I started investigating the Praxis Holdings transfers and connected them to Elena Morozov's testimony about the fertility department's off-book procedures. The restaurant continues buzzing around us. Investment bankers celebrating successful transactions, tech executives planning IPO strategies, private equity partners discussing their latest portfolio acquisitions. Normal Manhattan business dinner conversations happening at tables full of people who have no idea they're sitting 20 feet away from a criminal fraud confession. This doesn't change anything, Lucas says, though his tone suggests he's trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. People make mistakes. Complex situations get misunderstood. I almost laugh, because that's exactly the kind of response you'd expect from someone who's built their career on optimizing systems and minimizing risk exposure. Except this isn't a complex situation that got misunderstood. This is systematic fraud that affected multiple families and involved hundreds of thousands of dollars in stolen assets. Lucas, I say, keeping my voice conversational and professional, you should know that copies of this documentation have been provided to federal prosecutors, the hospital's board of directors, and the SEC investigators who are reviewing potential securities fraud related to the venture capital funding for your telehealth startup. Because here's the thing about due diligence that most people don't understand. When you're dating someone facing federal criminal charges, and that someone has been systematically committing fraud in the same medical field where you're raising investment capital, the regulatory agencies start asking very uncomfortable questions about your own business practices and ethical standards. The silence stretches for exactly 47 seconds. I know because I'm watching the second hand on my Rolex Submariner, the one Sabrina bought me for our 10th anniversary back, when she still thought this partnership was going to last forever. Finally, Sabrina looks up at me with eyes I don't recognize anymore. What do you want, Grant? What do I want? I want my children to have been conceived honestly. I want the past 15 years to have been based on truth instead of systematic deception. I want to trust the person I built a life with instead of treating every conversation like a potential securities fraud investigation. But those are things that can't be negotiated or litigated or acquired through any amount of leverage or strategic planning. I don't want anything, I tell her, standing up and leaving $200 on the table to cover dinner and tip. I just wanted you to know that the information asymmetry has shifted. I walk out of La Bella Vita into the Manhattan evening, leaving them to figure out how to rebuild their lives around the knowledge that everyone now knows exactly what they've done and what they're facing. Because sometimes the best business strategy is just making sure your counterparts understand the true scope of their liabilities. The next morning feels like the aftermath of a successful hostile takeover. That strange quiet that follows when all the dramatic negotiations are finished and you're left dealing with the operational realities of what you've actually won. I'm making coffee in our Upper West Side kitchen when my phone starts buzzing with news alerts about Riverside Children's Hospital, and I realize the story is finally breaking into mainstream media coverage. Fertility fraud investigation expands as federal prosecutors target hospital staff. The Wall Street Journal picked it up first, probably because their healthcare reporter has sources inside the DA's office who understand that systematic medical fraud involving high-net-worth families is exactly the kind of story that drives clicks and subscription revenue. By 9 a.m., Bloomberg, Reuters, and the New York Post are all running variations of the same narrative. Prestigious Manhattan hospital under investigation for genetic deception scheme affecting dozens of wealthy families. None of the articles mention Sabrina by name yet, but they all reference multiple staff members and shell company funding arrangements and premium fee structures for enhanced services. The kind of carefully neutral language that suggests legal teams are already reviewing every word for potential defamation liability. Rowan's eating Cheerios and reading something on his iPad, completely oblivious to the fact that his genetic identity is now part of a federal investigation that's dominating New York's business news cycle. I keep my voice normal when I tell him I'll be driving him to school instead of letting him take the subway, because the last thing we need is some ambitious reporter trying to interview an 11-year-old about his mother's alleged crimes. By 10:30, Riverside's communications department is in full crisis management mode. Dr. Howard Lynn releases a statement that reads like it was written by Morrison and Forster's litigation crisis team. The hospital is cooperating fully with ongoing investigations and has implemented comprehensive compliance reviews to ensure all patient services meet the highest ethical and medical standards. Translation: we're throwing everyone involved under the bus while trying to minimize institutional liability exposure. Lucas Hale's name appears in the afternoon news cycle, not in connection with the fertility fraud, but because 3 different venture capital firms have suddenly postponed funding discussions for his telehealth startup. In the private equity world, this is called reputational risk mitigation, when potential investors decide that your business plan comes with too much regulatory uncertainty to justify the capital allocation. I'm reviewing Verdict AI's quarterly board package when Amara calls with an update that confirms what I already suspected. The federal investigation is expanding faster than anyone anticipated. DA Lila Park is convening a grand jury, she tells me. They've identified at least 15 families who received fraudulent genetic services, with total damages approaching $3 million. The criminal charges are going to include conspiracy, mail fraud, wire fraud, and potentially RICO violations if they can prove this was an ongoing enterprise. RICO violations: the same statutes they use to prosecute organized crime families and systematic corporate fraud schemes. When federal prosecutors start throwing around racketeering charges, it means they're not just going after individual bad actors. They're treating the entire operation as a criminal organization designed to defraud patients systematically. What's Sabrina's exposure looking like? Significant. She coordinated multiple fraudulent procedures, controlled the shell company that collected premium payments, and used her medical credentials to legitimize the genetic substitution protocols. Her attorney is probably already discussing plea bargain options with the prosecutor's office. Wednesday brings news that makes me actually laugh out loud. Lucas has resigned from 2 advisory board positions and stepped back from his role as chief medical officer of the telehealth startup. In corporate terms, this is what happens when your professional network decides you've become a liability that outweighs your value proposition. But here's where it gets interesting, and where my venture capital background becomes strategically relevant. While reviewing my personal investment portfolio, I discover something I'd completely forgotten about. Verdict AI's angel fund holds a 6% equity position in PettyConnect, the same telehealth startup where Lucas serves as chief medical officer. 6% isn't controlling interest, but it's enough to have board representation and significant influence over management decisions. More importantly, our investment agreement includes standard morality clauses and regulatory compliance requirements, the kind of protective provisions that let investors remove management team members who become liabilities to the company's growth prospects. I pull the original term sheet and review Section 4.3. The company shall immediately remove any officer or key employee who becomes subject to criminal investigation or regulatory action that could materially impact the company's business operations, funding prospects, or regulatory compliance status. It's the kind of standard language that most entrepreneurs agree to without thinking, assuming they'll never need to worry about criminal investigations or regulatory problems. But when your chief medical officer is dating someone facing federal fraud charges in the same medical field where your company operates, those protective clauses become very relevant very quickly. Thursday morning, I call an emergency board meeting for PettyConnect. As a significant investor with board representation, I have the right to request immediate review of management team risks and strategic planning adjustments. The kind of corporate governance process that happens when portfolio companies face existential threats to their business model. The board convenes via Zoom at 2 p.m., 5 venture capitalists, 2 industry experts, and me, all trying to figure out how to protect a promising healthcare startup from the reputational damage of having a chief medical officer whose personal life has become a federal crime scene. Lucas's association with the Riverside investigation creates unacceptable regulatory risk. I explain, presenting the same kind of risk analysis I'd use for any portfolio company facing compliance issues. Petty Connect operates in the same pediatric healthcare space where systematic fraud has been identified. Having someone connected to that fraud serving as our chief medical officer exposes us to FDA scrutiny, investor concerns, and potential customer acquisition problems. The other board members asked the kinds of questions you'd expect. Can we wait for the investigation to conclude? What are the legal implications of removing him now? How do we maintain operational continuity during a leadership transition? But the math is simple. Keeping Lucas as chief medical officer during a federal fraud investigation is like keeping a CFO who's under SEC investigation for securities fraud. Even if he's ultimately cleared of wrongdoing, the regulatory uncertainty and reputational risk make him unmarketable to potential investors and customers. The board votes unanimously to accept Lucas's resignation and begin an immediate search for his replacement. Clean, professional, documented according to proper corporate governance procedures. No personal animosity, no vindictive actions, just standard risk management protocols applied to a portfolio company facing management team liability. That evening, I'm helping Zoe with her spelling homework when she asks another one of those questions that cuts right through all the corporate strategy and legal maneuvering. Daddy, are you and Mommy friends anymore? How do you explain to an 8-year-old that her mother committed systematic fraud, but that you still want her to have a relationship with both parents? How do you translate criminal investigation and federal charges into language that doesn't traumatize someone who still believes that grown-ups always make good decisions? Mommy and I have some big disagreements about important things, I tell her, which is probably the understatement of the century. But we both love you and Rowan more than anything in the world, and that's never going to change. Will Mommy come to my school play next week? I don't know, sweetheart, but I'll definitely be there, and I'll make sure someone records it so we can watch it together afterward. Later, after both kids are asleep, I pour myself a glass of Blanton's and review the day's developments. Federal grand jury convened. Sabrina's legal exposure increasing. Lucas effectively removed from his executive position and facing professional exile from the venture. Capital community. In corporate terms, I've successfully defended against a hostile acquisition attempt, protected my core assets, and eliminated key threats to my long-term strategic position. The kids are safe, financially secure, and living in a stable environment while the criminal justice system handles the systematic fraud that destroyed our family structure. But sitting in our penthouse overlooking Central Park, watching the city lights reflect off the reservoir, I realized that winning a corporate battle and rebuilding a family are two completely different challenges. And I'm about to find out which one actually matters. 6 months later, the final orders read like a successful acquisition closing. Full custody to me, supervised visitation for Sabrina pending criminal sentencing, comprehensive asset recovery, including the $218,750 stolen through Praxis Holdings plus damages and attorney fees. Judge Holloway's ruling is clean, methodical, and absolutely devastating to anyone who thought systematic fraud would result in a favorable custody arrangement. Riverside Children's Hospital settles the civil litigation for an undisclosed amount and creates a new ethics oversight committee. They ask me to serve as a community representative, which is corporate speak for, please don't file additional lawsuits while we rebuild our reputation. I accept, because sometimes the best way to prevent future fraud is to help design better compliance systems. Verdict AI closes our Series C with Sequoia leading a $47 million round, largely because our contract fraud detection algorithms prove themselves in the most personal possible way. 2AM Law 50 firms signed enterprise agreements for our medical malpractice litigation analytics platform. Sometimes the best product demonstrations happen when you're defending your own family. The kids adjust better than I expected. Rowan makes varsity baseball as a freshman. Zoe masters long division and decides she wants to be a scientist who helps people. They see Sabrina twice a month under court supervision, which is probably more stability than our marriage provided during its final years. I spend fewer evenings in Tom Ford suits and more time cooking dinner, helping with homework, and explaining why we can't actually buy a private jet even though we technically could afford it. When I do wear the suits, it's because I choose to, not because I'm hiding behind corporate armor. On a warm evening in September, I'm sitting on our penthouse balcony with a quiet pour of Macallan 25, watching Central Park turn golden in the sunset. The city moves below like a living algorithm, people building families, closing deals, making promises they might actually keep. Rowan's at baseball practice. Zoe's reading in her room. Our home feels stable in a way it never did when it was built on systematic deception. People say I won this war, but that's not quite right. I didn't win anything. I just protected what mattered and let the truth do the heavy lifting. The envelope at La Bella Vita wasn't revenge. It was simply information, presented at the right moment with appropriate documentation. Now my life reads clean, line by line, like a properly audited financial statement. The kids sleep easy. The assets are protected. The compliance systems work. And tomorrow, I'll wake up knowing that everything in our portfolio is exactly what it appears to be.